Okay, well, today we are here to chat about navigating the AI driven landscape of cloud security. We're going to talk about some trends and insights. And SentinelOne is really happy to be hosting this webinar, but to be joined by some wonderful partners. And I'll say, nobody in this group is necessarily an AI expert. It's not the core part of their job per se, but this has quickly become such a big element of talking about the security space this year. So we're really excited to bring people together to talk about how this fits into the context of things. So the planned flow here is that we'll do some quick introductions. We'll go through some of the questions we're planning to ask so you can see if there's anything you want to get prepped to submit in the Q&A. We'll do Q&A at the end, but if you have any follow-up questions during the conversation, please feel free to put them in. We'll go through our discussion and then, of course, that dedicated time. And I'm going to hand it off to our panelists to introduce themselves today. And we'll start with my colleague, Adriana.
Thank you so much, Laura. So hi, everyone. My name is Adriana Corona. I'm Director of Product Management at SentinelOne, specifically for cloud security. And I focus on CSPM and CIEM. So to spell it out, it's Cloud Security Posture Management, Cloud Infrastructure Entitlements Management. We have so many acronyms, right? So glad to be here and nice to meet everybody. And Clinton and Ryan, can't wait to chat with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much, Adriana. Very glad to be here today. My name is Clinton Herget. I'm the field CTO at Snyk, which is pronounced like a pair of sneakers or sneaking around. It's also an acronym. It stands for So Now You Know. So hopefully at the end of this hour, we all know a little bit more about AI and the cloud security landscape. At Snyk, we are a developer security platform. So we focus on integrating security more deeply into developer processes as they're building applications. As for me, I spent about 20 years building software for a living, and now I get to talk about building software for a living, which is a lot easier. So really looking forward to spending this hour nerding out about all things generative AI, cloud security, and hopefully a little DevSecOps sprinkled in as well. Pass it off to Ryan.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on, folks. The name's Ryan Orsi. I'm at AWS in the partner network, and I run an organization called Cloud Foundations. It's in the name. AWS has some great job titles here, but I deal with foundational services. So that includes all of our security portfolio, application monitoring and observability, and also I have the next gen developer experience tools, which are Gen AI powered development experiences for folks out there. And my main job and my team is to work with partners like SentinelOne, like Snyk, and many others around the globe. And we help develop new solutions and use cases for those latest customer challenges out there in the field. So glad to be with you all here today.
Great. And I think we've just got a little bit of an audio issue with Ryan. So Ryan, if you can check the chat there, we'll see if we can sort that out for you. And in the interim, I am going to push a poll to folks in the audience. So what were your cloud security priorities in 2023? What were you thinking about? So take a minute to answer that question. It is multi-select, I believe. So if there were multiple priorities, go ahead in there. Okay. So in terms of the planned questions today, and I do say planned because we don't know exactly where this is going to go. What were the big stories in 2023? What has stood out? How does Gen AI fit in? What happened at reInvent? We're going to get the insight from Ryan there. And what's still missing when it comes to the cloud security market, right? There are tons of vendors. There are tons of partnerships. We've got cloud providers who are, AWS provides security elements as well. So what are people still looking for? Is there still a role for us to be innovating in this space? And then some predictions about next year. So let's see here. I'm going to push to see what the results were. So, okay, everyone responded, said they were worried about, or their priorities were about strengthening their overall cloud security posture or compliance requirements. That's great news for a CSPM product manager like Adriana. We had folks talking about education and training, implementing new security processes for developers specifically in modern apps. So lots in this space to still think through. So let's jump to our first question here. What were the big stories in cloud security 2023 from your perspectives? And we'll start with Ryan.
Sure. And Laura, can you hear me okay? How's the audio? Okay.
Ryan, how about I'm still hearing some warbling. Can you move on to the next question? Laura and Ryan, would you mind logging out and logging back in? Cool. Thank you.
Well, I think the next question is really predicated on us assuming that Gen AI is going to be part of that. But I don't know if the question is, what were the big stories? Clinton, do you want to share your perspective, and then we'll hear from Adriana as well?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think obviously 2023 will look back on as the year that ChatGPT took the world by storm. Obviously, everybody talking about generative AI, and that hype cycle, I really feel like it's almost blown itself out at this point, where we're now thinking about, well, what are the real security implications when it comes to the use of generative AI in code, for example. From a cloud security perspective, I think obviously coming into 2023, on the heels of vulnerabilities like Log4Shell, supply chain security continues to be a major concern on the part of organizational risk managers. And then we also see a shift the call out from CSPM earlier, I think, was really well placed. And there's a ton of other acronyms in this space. When you talk about CWPP and CNAP, and we're also seeing the ASPM market emerge. So how do all of those relate together, right? I think is really the big story that we're tracking. What do organizations need to be thinking about when it comes to not just securing the cloud sort of as a source of concern in and of itself, but how do we secure the cloud in the context of the applications that we're deploying onto it? And where really is the dividing line between what we would previously have called cloud security and what we might now refer to as modern application security, which of course is cloud native. It's born in the cloud. It uses infrastructure as code. So that's really one of the big stories for me, is this continued evolution of the market. And we as the vendor community sort of moving together and moving into each other's territory a little bit as we redefine some of these categories and present best practices in terms of how to secure our cloud workloads.
So you mentioned another 4-letter acronym here. So just in case not everybody here is up to speed on the latest and greatest there. What is ASPM?
Yeah, great question. So ASPM is Application Security Posture Management. And the reason I bring that up is if we look at what constitutes a modern application, and here I'm talking about software built within the past few years, it sort of fundamentally looks different than software that would have been written in previous generations, where you had much more compact and well understood supply chains, for one. You had generally a reliance on proprietary code, often all written by people who work for the same company and then deployed onto bare metal servers that very often were in literally the same building as the people writing the code. Modern software doesn't look anything like that. It's written all over the world. We rely tremendously on open source dependencies that can take up 95 to 99% of the lines of code in an application. We use containers as the unit of delivery for that software. The actual application development teams, because they're using DevOps, own their own services, sort of cradle to grave, including all of the cloud infrastructure, which they're writing with infrastructure as code, as well as things like the monitoring associated with it, even the roles and permissions. We mentioned CIAM earlier. So when we think about modern applications, cloud almost becomes a subset of that, in that the vulnerabilities or the risks we would associate with modern software require context from different parts of the application stack. To take Log4Shell as an example, what does it take for that vulnerability to present a risk to your organization? Well, first of all, you need a particular version of Log4j in one of your open source dependencies, right? But that's sort of the easy one. You also need to be building your that dependency into a container in a particular way that actually makes it exploitable. You need to be calling the method that contains the vulnerability from your first-party code. It actually needs to get deployed to a place where you have inbound internet access, right, coming from the outside. And then there's additional conditions like you need egress traffic on an LDAP port. So in other words, in order to determine the risk associated with a vulnerability, you need to collect context from across that application stack, including cloud, but also including more traditional application security metrics like software composition analysis, static code analysis, and put all of those together into a risk profile. So when we say ASPM, we're talking about how to effectively prioritize vulnerabilities in modern software that takes cloud security as a component, but really broadens its view from there and gives everyone in the organization kind of a single sheet of music to read from when we think about triaging and hopefully remediating the biggest risks to the organization.
Oh, very cool. I mean, I think sometimes we forget that these modern applications don't exist in a vacuum and they are accessed and interacted with from all over the place. I love it. Ryan, you're back. You're back. Things sounded better. So thank you so much. What were your takes on the biggest stories in cloud security in 2023?
Well, I'm going to go back to some fundamentals. You can see, like at AWS, we've been constantly trying to make things simpler and working through partners like yourselves to make things simpler for our mutual customers that are on the line today. And one of the big areas that I noticed we've significantly moved the needle in the right direction is something I'm personally passionate about in my background in security. It's the fundamentals of collecting telemetry and logs from not just the cloud. You're going to see AWS getting more and more of our stories out there about a holistic view of context coming from telemetry of endpoints, no matter where they are, application-specific views, to Clayton's point, of like application traces. So historically, there's been kind of a challenge for folks in how they integrate multiple products together, multiple security products, that everything produces logs, everything produces data, and getting their arms wrapped around that information. And there's always a sneaking suspicion, I can tell by the poll we just had the audience take, am I collecting logs from everything that I should be? Do I have the right correlation in place to make sure that logs from source A are correlated with sources B, C, and D in order to do the great analysis and predictive threat hunting that most of you folks can do out there in the world? So we've seen like AWS in particular taking a leadership role with the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework, or OCSF. We really believe like it's not an AWS thing. It's really, we're hoping to get this into the hands of more folks in the industry to think about an open source view of collecting logs and spending less time collecting logs and less time copying log source 1 over to location 2, and then figuring out that this log source is 8 columns wide and it has 16 character limits, and transforming everything around. That's a lot of wasted time when the analysts or the software that's trying to use this as inputs is trying to ultimately come up with indicators of compromise. Is something actually happening? So I think a kind of big story of 2023 was, let's think together holistically about how to spend less time doing that heavy lifting around logging and do more time about getting straight to the point, whether or not a compromise has occurred, whether or not activity is suspicious from a holistic perspective, not just cloud, but applications, wherever they may run, endpoints, wherever they may be operated.
Oh, I like, you both talked about context, we're talking about making things easier, getting visibility things, standardizing. OCSF is awesome. We are thrilled to participate in that and use that as our standard, as well as SentinelOne. You didn't even talk about the cost of maintaining these logs all over the place and in different places too, which is, I know something that customers are concerned about. Adriana, what is your take on the biggest stories of 2023?
I actually agree with what you just mentioned, both of you. And the great thing is these two big ideas are kind of converging at a perfect moment. So one of them, you talked early on about the hype cycle, is generative AI. So the tools that are emerging in the space. And the other side of it was we have a lot of logs. They used to be in different places in different formats. Now through OCSF, spearheaded by AWS, that's something that we're converging on as well at SentinelOne. We're going to have a place to talk about it in the same way. So if you actually merge those two ideas together, that's where it's going to become powerful, right? Having a putting everything in one format in a single location, and then being able to do something like overlay an AI generated query prompt entry field that you can start asking questions without deeply understanding the query language or even having to know the underlying data structure, even though the underlying data structure for efficiency is now the same. So I think that's actually huge news. And it's nice that these things are converging around the same time. I think it's going to open up a lot of opportunities to help security professionals do their work a lot more easily.
I love that. When I think of some of the hardest jobs in the world, I definitely put security professional up there because it can sometimes feel like you against the world for folks. So you brought up, the Gen AI element, and this has been all over the news. I would say, particularly, maybe it was RSA was kind of that tipping point earlier this year where it suddenly just took the oxygen in every room it seems we walk into. And it's really tricky to sort out what's real, what's kind of imaginary, what's people maybe just picking up not the accurate thread and running with that. So what do you see, Adriana, as the reality versus the noise when it comes to cloud security use cases in Gen AI?
I think that's an excellent question, especially because now it's the very early stages of a new impressive technology. So when I think about what's the reality versus noise, I'm really thinking about what are the misconceptions we have right now. I think a lot of them are because it's so exciting and new, early stage. I think right now we're in a moment where we're both demanding too much of generative AI and we're expecting too little. So strangely enough, it's both sides. When I say we're demanding too much, what I mean is like we're saying whatever this technology is capable of doing, it should do it flawlessly. If it can generate code, the code has to be perfect, right? It can't have any vulnerabilities because it needs to, be generated in a way that's superior to what a human would do. So I do think we're setting up some expectations of these systems where we expect the output to be entirely accurate. Like the bar is pretty high there. And at the same time, our expectations may be too low. So we're also thinking whatever it's capable of doing today, that's what it's roughly going to be capable of doing tomorrow. I think we're already seeing those expectations break down. It's not going to be a chat input all the time. We're already seeing multimodal models. That's actually like a tongue twister. Multimodal models emerge in this space. And the other thing that I think we haven't thought long enough about is imagining that its current pitfalls are actually insurmountable. One good example is early on, I think a lot of the objections to should we really even attempt to use large language models in the security space where hallucinations, untrustworthy, it's going to spit out whatever you think. Already there are tools that are being used to address that big concern, something like retrieval-based context. So I do think we're in that space where what's actually going to be possible will be surprising. And at the same time, we're treading really lightly in terms of trust and our quality bar for accuracy.
I think you've got that great product manager or product leader view of don't assume the problem is insurmountable. There has to be a way around some of the things that we've been getting stuck on, maybe in terms of headlines. So thank you so much for sharing that. Ryan, I'm going to come back to you, Quentin, because I know we talked a little bit about AI generated code. So I want to go there after this, if that's cool. But Ryan, what do you think is, myths versus reality here?
Reality versus myths. Is my audio okay? I got to ask every time I come off mute and I'm like nervous.
It's actually, it is wonky again.
Wonky. Okay.
It's wonky again.
I'll see you in 60 seconds.
Thanks, Ryan. Quentin, do you want to chime in here before we go more in depth on that other topic? What do you think is myth versus reality today for most folks in the Gen AI and cloud security space?
Yeah, I love the way Adriana just framed that, right? That we demand too much but expect too little. I think that's exactly where we're at. When we look at, in particular, Gen AI's ability to generate code, there's an initial shock of like, oh my God, it's amazing, right? It can act just like a junior developer. It can solve 80% of my use cases. But then we almost are so impressed by it, we forget that additional 20%, right? In particular, one of the things that we have to struggle to keep in mind is that these AI models are designed for confidence rather than accuracy. And that works actually very, very well when you're asking it to write poetry or you're working in a chatbot, right? But that opens up intentionally the prospect of hallucinations. And hallucinations in some way are what allows these models to continue to learn, right? Now, from a code perspective, that introduces particular pitfalls when it comes to security. Now, are those insurmountable? No, I don't think anyone thinks that. But we are in the phase where the technology is sufficiently immature that we do have to treat it, particularly from a code perspective, as something unvetted, right? And we have to apply additional security learnings to it, particularly because, as we were saying on the previous question, vulnerability in modern software is sort of multifactorial, right? It's actually very difficult to analyze a single snippet of code and say, is this secure or not? But that's fundamentally what we're asking a lot of these code copilots to do. And that's almost an unfair question, right? That falls in the area of sort of demanding too much. However, what we lose sight of is the fact that we have a lot of traditional bread and butter technologies, and I like the way Ryan framed earlier, the back to basics motion that actually can be used to test our applications at scale, that can often be integrated directly into the developer experience and make up for the potential additional risk of some of that generative AI code. So this is not saying that like we should be very scared of what's coming out, or that there may be novel or qualitative differences in the risk we're bringing on board, so much as just saying, look, in some ways, Gen AI is no different than DevOps or cloud or other ways that we've abstracted away the undifferentiated heavy lifting of building technology. And that simply means we need more automation, right? We need more ways to climb up the value ladder. And that's exactly what software developers are doing right now by saying, I'm going to have Gen AI Copilot do a certain amount of this work if I'm using Code Whisperer, for example, but I'm also going to make sure I'm doing my static analysis, my composition analysis, that I've got that integrated in an automated way so that the organization can be relatively sure that we're getting the best of both worlds. We have the velocity that comes from the addition of Gen AI development, but also the assurance that comes from making sure we're scanning frequently and at the right points in the SDLC from an AppSec perspective.
I love it. And I think what we're dancing around here is it's not like humans have ever written any risky code, right? Like, why are we? It's just different, maybe different risks that we're looking at. Love that you brought up Code Whisperer, and we've got Ryan back. So, Ryan, what's reality versus noise here?
Reality versus noise. Okay. Am I okay? Am I warbly? Am I all right?
Yeah.
All right. I'll just see you guys every 3 minutes. I'll come back on and off. Code Whisperer, Code Companions, that's real. That's not noise. We have a very exciting roadmap also behind Code Whisperer. And if you all saw the Amazon Q announcement at reInvent, that was one of the big announcements. Generative AI is not great actually at math, believe it or not, but it is great at inferring the intent of a prompt. So, for example, developer productivity, that is absolutely real. Developers that are more junior in their careers performing at senior levels is absolutely legit. Senior level developers being able to take on more work or direct more work, kind of architecting quickly through a code companion like Code Whisperer, definitely a reality. And also we're seeing that the security checks being done live as code is being written with these code companions like Code Whisperer, also very, very legitimate. And for example, like with Amazon Q now, just asking if a developer doesn't understand what an ancient COBOL file does, they can literally type the prompt, what does this file do? And it will show them, oh, this is a subroutine tied to your accounting library that actually produces this kind of an output, requires this kinds of inputs. Would you like me to upgrade or transform that into the latest Java or Python language that your company supports? It can actually do that for you. Calculating precise mathematical equations, not quite yet, right? And there's going to be other models that come to life that are more appropriate for that kind of a use case. In the world of security, we see generative AI being used for defense and offense. Those are kind of two big use cases. That's the good folks and the bad folks, right, around the world. The bad use cases that we see are people actually stringing together different malware attacks and doing the reconnaissance in an automated fashion, trying to find different ways into an organization that traditionally might have taken a human being modifying scripts and modifying code to do reconnaissance. Unfortunately, if the model is left to like an unrestricted space, it can actually be used for nefarious reasons. On the contrary, predicting and seeing where attackers are trying to go along a campaign is also being used for defense, and that's totally legitimate as well. The part where I kind of see some noise coming in right now, however, is intelligent reasoning, piecing together different pieces of contextual threat indicators. The ultimate decision of whether these 400 indicators across all these endpoints and all these network nodes and et cetera, and cloud workloads, if they together comprise an indicator of compromise and in fact a true positive security incident, it's kind of a bit of a gray area today whether or not the models can replace that human reasoning of intelligent reasoning. I think it will get there. I think we're on like an early stage roadmap on that path. And then there's the contrary to that is, do you want an algorithm making that decision, or do you want that left to a human being? Maybe on the remediation side, it's a human. Maybe on the actual classification side, it's a machine. So those are my quick highlights.
I think that's really interesting. And it's definitely something that software vendors in the security space are trying to find that balance of, right? What do we automate by default? Maybe what do we leave as human driven by default as well? Okay, so I popped up a poll while you were talking there, Ryan. Does your organization use AI generated code or any type of code Copilot? And got 50% saying yes. So we've got some, I would say that's still early adopters at this point. 33% straight up no, and about 17% not sure, and not sure if they actually want to know what's going on there right now.
You want to know. You do want to know at least what we're talking about. Have a look.
So we talked a little bit about what's real, what's not, what's being used. I want to go back to Clinton here because we mentioned some of the Copilot or CodePilot options out there. But one of the things I'm curious about is, do we actually need unique cloud security solutions to support the application of Gen AI, both offensive, defensive? Does it dictate a need for a new 4-letter acronym, or is it a foundational piece of what's going on in the industry in general? I'll start with you, Clinton.
Let's hope there's not going to be another 4-letter acronym, because I think I'm running out of space in my brain for all of them and how they all interact. I actually love what Ryan just said, though, about the things that Gen AI, and particularly LLMs, are both good at and bad at. And the fact that they're not good at doing math, I think, is something really interesting we should pay more attention to. In that, when we look at what constitutes vulnerability in software and technology, like that is fundamentally a math problem. It's not a language problem. Right? You need a data flow that goes from someplace unprotected, that doesn't get sanitized, that goes to someplace protected, right? And then allows either egress or manipulation of that data. And that is fundamentally not the kind of problem that these LLMs are designed to solve. And that's okay, right? That's not to denigrate anything that CodeWhisperer or any of these other Gen AI tools are doing, but it fundamentally indicates that like you need a different tool for a different kind of job. What you need to understand vulnerabilities is traditional things like data flow analysis and composition analysis that can be layered on top of these innovative Gen AI technologies. Now, does the sort of rush to adopt Gen AI and everything potentially open the door for new kinds of solutions? Yes, I think it does. When we think about the novel risks associated with things like model poisoning, for example. Now, because none of us is necessarily an AI expert, I don't think we're positioned to say where we're at in terms of development of some of those new tools, but that's okay, because fundamentally, I think most organizations are still getting up to speed, as we just saw in the last poll question, about whether they're even going to be using generative AI co-pilots, in which case the answer is not, I would say at this point, we need to rush to buy a bunch of unique solutions, so much as we need to double down on our existing protection mechanisms, right? We need to make sure we're scanning code with the new frequency that's been established, right? Fundamentally, from a developer perspective, the issue is not that generative AI code is different in some way, but it is an issue that there's a lot more of it, right? Because it's fundamentally just a lot easier to get in the pipeline. So that means we need solutions that are able to work at the speed of the new environment, even if they don't have to offer kind of novel value in terms of we only secure generative AI code, for example. And particularly because, as we've been saying, it's often the case that you can't identify a risk in modern applications until you collect all of that context, including from the cloud, right? But I think it would be a mistake to say, well, we can, one new technology is going to solve this problem, as opposed to more investment in all of the critical aspects, whether that's CSPM, ASPM, static analysis, SCA, et cetera, that actually enable us to say, okay, we're confident that we've collected enough context about everything going on. And might there be, when we have this same meeting in a year, a new innovative solution that puts a Gen AI layer on top of all of that context? Yes, absolutely. But you need to understand it first, right? I think rushing to say we have a new use case for AI fundamentally neglects the fact that most organizations are still catching up here with some of these bread and butter aspects to get us in a much better position to say, well, where are there still gaps that we might want to invest in once we're comfortable that we're getting back to basics, again, as Ryan said earlier.
Oh, I like that you started with a firm "I hope not." I'm with you there, Clinton. I like that we're still talking about get the basics, get the foundations right. It's a speed issue maybe versus a new solution issue. Adriana, Ryan, anything you want to add there?
A little bit. So I think Ryan actually brought up one of the things that worry me, which is it's not just the developers who are using these new tools, and it's not just the security team, it's the adversaries. So just keeping that in mind every time we talk about what is opened up by using large language models, that's a huge concern. And then for this question, I think there's a few lenses. There's the use of LLMs in coding tools, so auto-generating code. What are the implications of that? How do we check that for security vulnerabilities? Then there's also just building security tools that leverage large language models. For that, I think there's a slightly different space of concern, which is we're already seeing those prompt hacking attempts. So the way that you would train a large language model in any application, but including security, is you give it instructions, right? It has context that you provide. So if and when you would work on a security tool that leverages a large language model, and if it's something a human can interact with, I would imagine right away, one of the first things will be, how can I get it to divulge its instructions? So those are things that I think are hard to govern right now. I don't think anyone's really found the solution, but especially if you're building a security application that leverages LLMs, that's a huge area I think that we're going to be focused on as an industry.
Yeah, Adriana is so spot on. Like safe use of Gen AI. Everybody, please separate that totally from offensive, defensive uses of generative AI and security. Like they are absolutely totally different worlds. I mean, Amazon Bedrock Guardrails was just announced at reInvent. So there's, us cloud providers and all of the partners around us, like Snyk and SentinelOne here, where we're kind of like collaborating together around the prompts and the responses that individuals or programs are sending into LLMs. That's more about like making sure employees aren't accidentally sending out their CRM. And like, if you have your sales team sending out a CSV file of all their like pipeline in their territory saying, please prioritize where I should go target, that's probably not great unless you're 100% sure that like you've got all the guardrails around that LLM that you're accessing, because you're exposing PII or company intellectual property to the internet. So, but again, if you did that, just email it to somebody, that's also not great practice. So the same fundamental security problems around a corporation trying to ensure that their employees are enabled to move quickly, use technology to stay like sharp, but please don't expose PII on the internet or don't expose company intellectual property to people that shouldn't have it. It absolutely remains the same. It's just now it's super easy and tempting. It's even more tempting for people to do that. So anyways, the safe use of Gen AI versus the security use cases, try to separate that in your minds, folks, when you're thinking about this for your companies.
Oh, I like that. So, Ryan, you gave us a little preview of some of the latest in kind of security announcements at AWS reInvent. So I'm just popping a poll up there to get a sense of, did the folks on this session attend reInvent in person, or did they catch some of the announcements? It's so much easier to live stream everything now, or catch all the sessions on YouTube that are just popping up on my LinkedIn nonstop. It's awesome. We're getting responses are trickling in, but do you want to give us an overview of what were some of the big security announcements at reInvent?
Sure. Yeah. One of my personal favorites, if you all are familiar with Amazon Detective, Detective's like an incident response tool in the cloud. So it's able to show you like visually all these things happen. They look kind of suspicious. And historically, the person looking at the user interface has to still kind of do some determination whether or not these collection of like roles accessing different AWS resources in this sequence is either suspicious or not suspicious. Now the Amazon Detective actually uses our own generative AI models through Bedrock, and natural language presents to the person in natural language, plain English right now, of group summaries. So that initial kind of determination if something is suspicious or malicious or just unusual is being done for you. So for those folks that are looking into the cloud for like actually responding to an incident or triaging something, that became a little bit easier. Also on the same side, Amazon Inspector now is doing code scanning of Lambda functions using generative AI remediation steps. So it's not math to what Clinton and I were just kind of bringing up, but it's the inference of what would be an appropriate, acceptable remediation step as this Lambda function has accidentally exposed some kind of a vulnerability potentially when it executes. And so it's catching that in the actual development of the Lambda function using Inspector. And that can actually be tied into development environments even outside AWS. So those are some of the big ones. Obviously, I mentioned the guardrails for Amazon Bedrock. The one feature which is still coming soon, I really hope it comes soon, is actually detecting company PII accidentally being inserted to the model or retrieved by the model. So that'll be a big one. But right now with the guardrails, you can all actually tune different categories of acceptable prompts that employees can send into a model, and you can kind of get closer to the enforcement and governance of safe use for your generative AI in your company. And anyways, those are some of the big ones. There was some partner program announcements with cyber insurance. So if you all are using Security Hub, you can actually get cyber insurance within 2 business days, leveraging some of the providers that are plugged into that. So if you're out there looking at, I have to renew this quote, definitely take a look for that, the cyber insurance announcement.
That's really cool. Thank you so much for running through that for us. As it turns out, nobody who responded to our poll was able to attend reInvent in person this year. So those are some good tips for sessions to catch. I think it's available to anyone worldwide at this point, particularly the live streams. And there were some really great breakout sessions this year, particularly around, I would say, applications of Bedrock as developers were going to town after it was announced and kind of made public to see what they could do with it, which is really cool. Okay, our next question here is, we've got so much in the security space. We've got cloud providers like AWS providing tools and native logs and information, and we've got security lakes. We have got longtime security vendors and partners in the space, and we're continuing to see more entering the space. But we haven't solved the security problem yet in the cloud. So I'm going to start with Adriana. What do you think is still missing when it comes to meeting cloud security needs for organizations? And while you're answering, I'm going to pop a poll up to try and get some feedback from the audience as well.
So I'm glad you've asked me this because I think about it all the time. So just a little bit of background. 15 years ago, I was a security analyst. So that's how I started my career. And the scary but huge opportunity that I face right now as a product leader in the security space is the knowledge that a lot of the pain I felt 15 years ago is the same pain, and that wasn't even in cloud, is the same pain that security professionals continue to feel day to day. So those unsolved problems, I know there's shiny new tools. I think we would all be best served by thinking deeply of whatever this new technology is, how can I apply it to solve these existing problems that have plagued our profession? I'll tell you some of what they are. They seem so simple. So if you think about it, what was the Gartner prediction of misconfigurations or preventable vulnerabilities and misconfigurations will be the source of 99% of incidents by 2025? Totally true. CSPMs have existed for over a decade, right? So it's not that we can't like turn a thing on that detects it. That's not the problem. As a security or as a former security analyst, the problem is, first of all, everyone kind of hates you, right? When when we were all working in person, you walk in the space and everyone ducks behind their cubicles because you're like, the cyber cop is here. What did I do? You're being sued, or you've been hacked, right? It's always this like relationship where you're antagonizing whoever you have to interact with as a security person. In modern days, and I think, Clinton, you'll have a lot to say about this, it's a lot about the relationship with DevOps. I'm the security professional. I know what the issues are. I understand the security risk. The engineer, who obviously did not intend to introduce the security vulnerability, doesn't know that deeply. And the time between when I figure out what to do about it and when Clinton had committed the code, the time that elapses means any kind of remediation action is going to break a production thing. So again, you're at odds, right? Now the developer's like, why are you slowing me down? I can't innovate. The security person's like, why do we still have these open vulnerabilities for 2 years, right? So this problem, super solvable. And I think that's where we should focus our efforts. Whatever the new technology, how do we solve these problems? One way to solve them, I think, it's really hard to figure out who launched the thing. Just asset provenance, deployment origin, super solvable. Let's solve it. If we have a data lake that has all of your data in OCSF in a structured format, how easy now could it be to be like, oh, tell me the most likely contact for this thing and communicate with them immediately? So the things that used to be workflow issues that would take days and hours, and then the turnaround time for developers to loop back and try to address the issue that would take even more days, that leaves you vulnerable to compromise for longer. I think we're now positioned to solve those really well, and I hope that's where we go in the next year. So I will stop talking so someone else has input on this one.
I'll toss in the feeling that I know everyone on the call, if you're involved in IT, let's just generalize it, maybe not even security, but am I logging and seeing everything? Dare I say visibility? I know it's silly to say in 2023, but if you can't see it, you can't protect it. So Adriana's comment there, like visibility of everything is still super important. Your companies are going to be releasing to your test environment, your prod environment quicker and quicker and faster. You're going to be having devs become more productive. So the volume of lines of code being generated is accelerating. But the general model of code being generated with or without vulnerabilities, and we hope that with more people are getting closer into scanning for code vulnerabilities at time of code generation, and going through tests and all the different environments before it reaches production. That's still the same software development lifecycle. It's just going to be moving faster. So visibility of what is and how that app is being used in the world. I mean, different statistics will tell you all, when something goes live with a public internet IP address, it's being attacked within something like 90 seconds of going online. So just being able to see everything is one big part of the problem. Being able to operationalize all the security tooling that you have, AWS services included, Snyk, SentinelOne, operationalizing, and my philosophy is just making sure you have trained human beings that understand what the tools do. You have processes in place, that would be your run books and playbooks or some automation. And you have an actual like response plan that happens when something goes south.
I love that it wasn't all about technology. We've got the people and the process being really critical to that too. Awesome. Clinton, what have you got to say about this?
Oh, so much, but I'll try and keep it to the next 14 minutes here. Definitely will echo everything that Adriana and Ryan just said. I do think that while we have gotten closer to solving that fundamental issue of how do we reveal organizational risk to the decision makers while they're building software rather than after the fact, right? We've gotten good at shortening that loop, but fundamentally there is still a delay, and that still makes for a poor developer experience, right? Again, as somebody who spent my whole career building software, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer that engineers spend 100% of their time like at their keyboards typing, right? Fundamentally, the act of building things with technology is a series of short iteration loops where I make a decision, I get hopefully immediate feedback, and then maybe I got an error message, I figured out what was causing it, I tried to make a fix, I recompiled, and hopefully what I got is a different error message, right? Which then continues down that path of making a bunch of small decisions. And my productivity as a developer is related to the number of those iteration loops I can pack into a given amount of time. It's not actually related to how often I'm correct. What security does, whether we're talking AppSec, CloudSec, any of these other domains, is it fundamentally lengthens those iteration loops. Why is that? Because I don't have all the context available to me to accurately assess organizational risk related to the decision I'm making. Often, and in the olden days, right, that would have to go all the way out to production to be scanned with some kind of audit-based tool. And then months later, I'd get a PDF back that says I did something wrong, but completely out of context, at the wrong time, with the wrong kind of information attached to it. Now, we have gotten better, right? We have DevSecOps now, where we have security gates inside the pipeline. So now instead of months later, it might be days or several hours later, but it's still at the wrong point that allows me to make a better decision the first time around. And Adriana, I think you put this really well. It's not that engineers are like chaos monkeys that want to introduce risk into the organization, but fundamentally, and I like to say it's a misnomer that developers don't like to work, but what they really don't like to do is rework. In other words, if I don't have all the available context to make the right decision the first time around, and you come, again, hours or days later and interrupt my flow state to say, you did this wrong the first time, when I couldn't have fundamentally known any differently because the required context to make the right decision only existed on the right-hand side of the SDLC and not the left, that's where friction comes from between engineering and security teams. So I agree completely. What is needed is not only collecting more context from across that entire sort of DevSecOps infinite loop, but then making that accessible, making it queryable. And I don't think there's any one particular vendor that's going to solve this problem. I do think it comes from partnerships. I think it comes from open standards. OCSF, which I always say incorrectly, is a great example of an open standard that is being pioneered by AWS in one case. But in order to make that viable, we need buy-in from across a wide variety of stakeholders. And I do think there is a similar standard that we could develop for a more proactive look at application and cloud security. What would it look like to have all of those risk pieces of risk context or risk factors for software collected in one place, sort of an application risk bus that I can then query as a developer, that can say to me as early as within my IDE, as I'm writing a SQL query, for example, it can pop up and say, hey, did you know, in a very sort of 90s clippy kind of way, not only are you not sanitizing that string correctly, so it potentially indicates a SQL injection vulnerability, but that database that your service talks to contains customer PII, and it gets deployed to a place that has inbound internet access, and all of the required conditions to exploit that vulnerability will be met by the time it gets deployed. You probably want to make a better decision about how you're sanitizing that string. To me, that kind of use case is the gold standard in terms of where we need to get to. And that involves cooperation from everyone and ultimately the kinds of open standards and partnerships that enable everyone to generate the sort of context that we're good at across that life cycle, put it all in one place and make that a single pane of glass and a single queryable interface, both for risk analysis professionals sitting on the right and for the builders of software sitting on the left.
For everyone, I like it. We've kind of come full circle. So let's go back to Ryan and see if he's got anything to add to this, because he kind of brought up a lot of these topics in the opening question.
I just wanted to give like the world a challenge. Like to Clayton's point is super accurate for like giving developers who are thinking of code and thinking of applications. If generative AI models could get to the point where we have enough information going into a central place, enough training data is being developed, if a developer can just type into a prompt, "Am I doing this securely?" That kind of prompt that is super basic will really help them democratize even the ability to code for people out there in the world. So challenge the world. Let's get to that point where you don't have to be writing specific queries, whether or not you're designing this like SQL join statement properly for best security best practices. Just, am I doing this securely would be the most amazing prompt to be able to get into an environment.
Right. I like that. Keep it simple, right? Okay, audience members, we are coming to the end of this, and I want to make sure that if you've got additional questions for the Q&A, get them into the Q&A chat. In those polls that we've been doing, you know, what's missing, what are your focuses? Folks seem to really be resonating with the context, with that communication, that whole life cycle, centralization of logs. You know, it sounds like we're on the right track based on audience responses here. And, you know, I'd fail as a marketer if I didn't get your predictions for what you smart folks think will be the big stories in 2024. And I think I've got Clinton teed up to start with his predictions.
If I can find the mute button, I'd be happy to. I think, well, let me be a little bit predictive and a little bit prescriptive here. Hopefully by the end of 2024, we say, this was the year we broke down silos. And this was the year we found ways to connect information about security risk across the entire footprint of an organization. And then exactly to Ryan's point, to make that accessible with models that can give us predictive information to help us make better decisions. And I hope we get there by recognizing that, look, there is not a single security vendor in the space that has 100% accurate information about everything. And Adriana, you brought up a great point earlier about even things like asset discovery, understanding where all of your software assets live, how they interact with each other. Something as simple as, if I'm a developer building a container, where does it go in my container registry? And then what other containers are built on top of it? And then where do those go in my production environment, such that I can understand the risk implications of making a decision about installing a particular package on that container image. So a lot of this comes down to, again, really boring things like a testable software lineage, to come in another four-letter acronym that we haven't talked about yet. Things like SBOM are a great step in the right direction, but it's really step 0 on the journey to understand how software fits together, how these decisions all affect each other, and then ultimately enabling all of that data to connect with each other to make some of these predictions about what's going to happen from a risk perspective, and ultimately making all of that available both to people who are assessing that risk and making decisions about what goes into their software. So I hope that's where we get by the end of 2024, or at least a little further along on that journey of understanding that we're all trying to do the same thing here. We're just looking at the elephant from different angles. What we need is to zoom out to understand that ultimately this is the same connected problem, and we need more automation, more tooling to understand the explicit relationships between all of these things to make better decisions about them.
Clayton said the word risk, so I feel inspired to say something next. Sorry. I'm gonna say a prediction that yes, generative AI is a big theme of what I'm about to say. But what I'm seeing, and I'm managing a global team, we're talking to a lot of very cool companies, 2 of which are with me today. Think of a situation where historically it's been difficult for a third party to assess the security posture or risk of an entire company. wherever their applications, code, assets, data may live. It could be in our cloud, could be in other clouds, could be anywhere in the world. But think of an industry where it's very critical that they have a good picture of how do I assess the risk of how that company operates. In the insurance industry is one I'll point out, I kind of hinted at earlier in the call today, but I really see the cyber insurance industry. Historically, they give you all a self-attestation, large questionnaire where you're asked to respond to things that you may have no clue about. And so they don't get a full picture of your security posture. You don't understand what they're asking. And it ends up being like a suboptimal situation for all parties, including for Snyk and SentinelOne and AWS and all of you on the call. I think industries like that, where they need to assess risk more accurately, and they have an entire buildings of data scientists and statisticians figuring out how to assess risk properly to make a business out of it. I think those kinds of industries, especially with more things being centralized, that data going into training models, more LLMs being available through services like Bedrock, it's going to make it easier for those businesses to thrive. And so making the ecosystem of all of us, right? Technology partners of yours, yourselves are actually operating your own businesses. It's going to reduce some friction. So I think you're going to see certain industries like that completely change in 2024. Let's see how that pans out.
Adriana, what are your predictions?
It's interesting. I didn't plan for this to go full circle, but to go full circle, talking about like what were the big stories in the last year, I do feel like even though they sprung up independently, the convergence of large structured data set with new powerful LLM models is going to be a game changer. And I can imagine it being kind of like your security helper or developer helper. Just having one way to just query a large data set and get the right answer. It doesn't matter what you're working on right now. Help me investigate X. Am I vulnerable to Y? Is this code at the right level of security based on my controls set by my company? I think that actually seems like a great solution that would help both security and development teams move more quickly, improve how their teams are functioning, and we're going to have to move faster anyway because the adversaries are going to use Gen AI too. So I think security teams won't see their work reduced in the way that we expect. I think sometimes we talk about Gen AI and think like, you can reduce the size of your team, or one day you're going to automate your SOC. I'm not sure that will be true. I think we're just going to find different work to do and be a lot more efficient at what's currently the bottleneck for security and development teams, or at least I hope that's true.
Oh, I like it.
We move up the value chain, right? We get rid of the undifferentiated heavy lifting. We move from being gatekeepers from a security perspective to being the creators of guardrails that are then ingested by everyone. And we're all ideally reading from the same sheet of music. I couldn't agree more.
3 bold predictions. I don't know if bold, very educated. You folks talked to a lot of customers. I love that there was kind of a thematic element across all 3 of, convergence, be it convergence of information, convergence of visibility and context of teams. 2024 could be a year of togetherness when it comes to the cloud security space. I want to thank you all panelists for taking the time to be with us today. We had a really great conversation, and thank you to everyone who attended. I hope you had a cybersecurity safe 2023 and all the best for 2024. Thank you.
Thank you.